Derek Milligan here. Policy video number 3 will be talking about worker co-ops. Have you ever thought to yourself, man, our bosses kind of suck. I wish we could band together and democratically decide how we want to run this company, because the workers sure know better than the guys in the suits up on the 3rd floor. Well, the good news is you're not alone. So we're going to jump right into it. This one takes a lot of explanation, and we're going to have a visual experience for you this time. First, it's important to understand the two groups of people involved in the behavior of a publicly traded company, the shareholders and the workers. The shareholders are a group which have a financial stake in a company's performance by way of the stock value. The majority of shareholders are not located in the same community which a company operates in. Additionally, they're almost certainly already quite wealthy. 84% of all stocks belong to the wealthiest 10% of American households. Lastly, they are unlikely to have expertise in the particular industry which they are invested in. On the other hand, we have the workers. The workers are the company. Without them, no work gets done and the company ceases to function. They live and spend their times in the local community, which bolsters local economies, and have far higher personal stakes in the success of a company than the shareholders do. By definition, they are experts in their own industry, so they also have a strong understanding of how their company works. Now, let's move on and see how these two groups can potentially affect the way that a company is ran. Currently in America, the overwhelming majority of publicly run companies have a board of directors, which is selected by the shareholders. The board of directors then has an enormous authority over the high-level business dealings of a company, and ultimately are responsible for any major business decisions made by the company they direct. They typically are compensated for their time in stocks of that company. So they are selected by stockholders, and then they are paid in stocks. So naturally, this relationship, which is built entirely around the stock performance of a company, has a fairly obvious conclusion that the stock prices of that company will take precedence over all other priorities of a healthy company. As labor power has declined over the years, we see directors becoming more bold in their pursuit of ever-growing stock prices, such as by performing stock buybacks, paying dividends to shareholders, and if they decide it will meet their fiduciary responsibility, they will even relocate a business somewhere that additional profit can be squeezed out of it. At best, these practices do not benefit workers or the local communities, and at worst it destroys lives in communities dependent on the company for not moving to countries which have cheaper labor. Fun fact, stock buybacks were actually illegal due to them being defined as stock manipulation until 1982, when the Reagan administration decided to overturn that law. An alternative to the board of directors model can be found in Germany, France, and Sweden. These countries all implement codetermination, which requires that a company's board of directors be partially filled with workers which are elected among the working population of any given company. Specific implementations vary, but they all serve the important purpose of allowing workers to have a direct say in major decisions which a company makes. The fact that countries which practice codetermination have far fewer companies choosing to move to locations with cheaper labor is no coincidence. Obviously, the portion of the board elected by the workers isn't going to vote to put all their workers out of a job, and when the outsider board members are forced to actually know and cooperate with the workers of a company, they tend to realize that profit above all else is not a humane or sustainable business practice. Numerous studies have shown that companies which practice codetermination have higher compensation for their workers, higher productivity, and higher job satisfaction when compared to typical companies. Lastly, we have the idea of worker cooperatives. Given the title of this video, you've probably already surmised that this is my personal favorite business model. For a worker cooperative, the shareholders are the workers. There are many different models which worker cooperatives can employ, the first of which is the implementation of a board of directors. However, this type of board of directors would be elected entirely by the workers, and they would be empowered to make decisions on behalf of all of their fellows. Another model of worker cooperative is what's called an ESOP, or Employee Stock Ownership Plan. In this model, workers accrue internal company stock, usually determined by tenure, and then vote on how the company proceeds based off their respective shares of the company's stock. A potential downside to this approach is that the stock can easily end up accrued in the hands of a small but very powerful minority, and depending on the circumstances, it may take new workers a substantial number of years before they are able to actually get involved in company decisions. Lastly, there is a direct worker cooperative. This model operates under the one person, one vote philosophy, which makes it the most democratic way of running a workplace. Oftentimes, new employees will be under a probationary period before they're allowed to participate, but typically that would be a year or less. With good policies in place on how votes are conducted and what issues trigger voting, this system of workplace democracy can be executed with minimal disruption to the workplace. Different methods of self-governance would work better for different types and sizes of companies. Really, there is no one size that fits all. The important takeaway is that a worker cooperative model places the power in the hands of the workers, who then can determine how they want their company to function, instead of being left to the whims of a small group of wealthy out-of-towners who are only interested in the stock price of a company. So now that you're all experts on what a worker co-op is and why it's a good thing, you're probably asking yourself, how do I make one? How do I join one? Well, luckily there's actually over 500 in the United States alone. You just don't often hear about them. Honestly, in the United States, they're usually pretty small. The average size is about 50 employees, but the largest is up to 2,000. In other countries, they're a lot more popular. In Spain, actually their 7th largest corporation is a worker co-op, so they can scale up pretty big. It's just that they haven't started to do that yet in the United States. And they tend to be pretty successful. The average annual profit margin is 6.5%, which is right around the national average for profit margin. So it's not as if they underperform similar companies, especially considering that most of those companies are small. A 6.4% profit margin is pretty respectable. And lastly, you're probably wondering, Derek, you're running for state representative. This is all well and good, but what does this have to do with any sort of policy? Well, I think that the state needs to help facilitate companies who want to transition to a worker co-op model. There's a whole lot of boomers who are looking to retire in the next few years and would love to have someone to pass their company on to, but they maybe don't have a particular individual in mind. Maybe they haven't found someone who they feel is worthy of the role that they are leaving. Well, why not just give it to all your employees all at once? But the problem is that there's not currently a very good mechanism for that sort of transition. 26% of companies co-ops do transition from a conventional company. That means 3/4 of them are generated from the ground up as a co-op. But I think that if the state implements an organization that will help facilitate that transition, that'll go a long ways towards making more worker co-ops in our economy. And what does that mean? It means helping employees go through the legal framework that's involved in that, helping them acquire loans so that they can purchase the companies, and just generally being a resource that can be available to employees who are wanting to become owners of the companies that they work at. And that way you can also help keep ownership local, because a lot of times what happens is firms will end up selling to an outside company that comes in and sells the entire company for parts, because all they want to do is make a quick buck. They don't care. They haven't put the years into the company in that community. They don't care about what's going on in Wichita, Kansas, because they're based out in California or out in New York. And they say, hey, we can turn this thing around, sell all the parts, sell all the machines, make a quick buck. So I hope that helps you understand why worker co-ops are good and why we should try and push towards them. I have more information and some links to some resources about this on my website, milliganforkansas.com. If this is something that you think that is worth supporting, then I would love to have your support on my campaign. And just get a hold of us. There's lots of different ways. So, see ya.